Good afternoon, and welcome to Dare to Love Yourself, Self-Advocacy and Self-Love. Theoria, come on off that mic and let's get started together today.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so happy to be here, and I'm looking forward to our discussion this afternoon.
Wonderful. So just a reminder to everyone that this session is being recorded for future playback on our YouTube channel and on our various social media platforms. We would love for you to come off mic, show your camera. Let's just have a good conversation today. Sounds like a plan? I got a little bit of a head nod, so I'm going to go with it. Let's keep it going. So, Theoria, start us off by giving us the correct pronunciation of your name and tell us where you're calling us from today.
Fantastic. So my name is Dr. Theoria Cason, and I am calling in from Savannah, Georgia.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us. We've known each other a few times. You have been an amazing moderator for one of our Today's Girl, Tomorrow's Woman panels in New York City. So very excited to delve a little deeper into a conversation around self-advocacy and self-love. So why don't you tell us about where you are today and what brings you to Savannah, Georgia, in terms of professionalism and personally?
So that's a great question. I'm actually at the crux of a pivot in my career. So I spent the past 10.5 years working in higher education, previously at an institution in upstate New York. Some of you may be familiar with Cornell University, but based on a series of events and thoughts and reflections last year, I decided it would be a good time for me to shift the way I continue to pursue my purpose in the work, and was subsequently recruited for a newly created position as the Senior Diversity and Inclusion Practitioner at a corporation called Gulfstream Aerospace. And Monday is my first day at my new job. So I recently relocated to Savannah, Georgia, and I'm very, very excited for this new journey in my professional career, because it was time for me to move on for a myriad of reasons. And we can get into how my decision to change my career path directly connects to my commitment to self-advocacy and my love for self, because those things definitely influence my decision.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. As the title kind of references, we've been having a series of virtual speakers to really talk about different career pathways, but our journey that we've taken to get to where we are today, because it really does tie closely into Today's Girl, Tomorrow's Woman mission and our vision for starting these conferences over 8 years ago now. And so very excited to delve a little bit deeper into how you got to your level of success today. And just a reminder to all of those that are participating and that you have access to the chat. So please drop questions, comments, or nuggets that you hear into the chat, and or come off mic and ask your questions along with me. So talk to me a little bit more about what were you like in high school? What was that experience like for you?
I would say that I was very bashful. Always interested in learning more. So I always had my head in a book. And I have an older sibling and a much younger sibling, but in high school, each of us as my mother's children, we kind of had like our experience as an only child. My brother's 8 years older than me, and my sister is 17 years younger than me. So for the bulk of my experience growing up from 10 to about 17, I was the only kid at home. I was raised by a single mother, so there weren't like peers for me to communicate with. So I spent a lot of time just like doing nerdy things, because that was my natural inclination. I had flashcards on a ring. I liked math and science, and I would quiz myself on random facts just because I like knowing things. By the time I got to high school, and I see the theme here, choosing a major and classes, my mother recognized early that scholarship and the traditional classroom structure worked well for me. I performed well in school. And so conversations about going to college were always a part of our discourse. And she always pushed me to take the higher or more challenging classes, because I placed well on like the end of year tests. And so she advocated for me to have opportunities to take the honors courses or the AP courses or the IB courses, et cetera. And I intentionally used the word advocacy because there were times when teachers or guidance counselors may have tried to suggest that I take a less challenging course load to ensure that I would be able to make straight A's. And my mother instead decided that she wanted me to experience some academic challenge and rigor so that I would be better prepared for the next level of scholarship. So I didn't always make straight A's, even though I let you all know that I've always had my face in the book. But she rather I take a path that taught me some grit, intellectually speaking, because the classes were a little bit more challenging, as opposed to taking classes that would guarantee like presumably guarantee a 4.0 GPA.
So can you walk us back through that just a little bit? So take us back to your high school days, and your mom is telling you that I want you in those stronger and harder classes, and I want you to be challenged, and I want you to develop some grit in this process. What was your response? Were you like, yeah, mom, whatever you say, I'm going to go with it? Or like, I don't want to do this.
I was probably somewhere in between. It depended on the subject matter. So as I mentioned, I always had a natural inclination for math and science, but my high school at the time didn't offer all subjects in at the AP level, for example. So I want to say it was like my freshman year, I was taking like AP European history. Never really been a huge fan of history. It took me a while to realize that my lack of interest in the type of history that was taught in school was because I didn't see myself reflected in that curriculum. It's not so much that I didn't care for history, but that didn't change the fact that I had taken in North Carolina, which is where I'm from, we have a course called like ELPSA, and it talked about the economic, legal, and political structure of American government. I took the honors version of that the summer before high school. So the next thing for me to do was to continue on that advanced track. I was very intimidated about taking that AP European course, but she pushed me to do it anyway. Now, when it was time to take AP English in like 11th and 12th grade, I had no hesitation because it was English, reading and writing was relatively easy for me. So it really depended on the subject matter, but I also was a really obedient child. So I did whatever she told me to do.
That is quite understandable. And I think for most of us that are in New York City or the surrounding New York State areas, we would probably equate that to like that IPSY course you referred to. I'm saying the acronym correctly. That would be like our politics and governments class, where we traditionally would have it a lot later. You would have had it a lot earlier in terms of your high school, your pathway. So it's nice to connect some of those dots. So what about some of the extracurricular activities or organizations that you may have been a part of while you were in high school?
Sure. I still sing, but in the high school that I attended, we had chorus classes that you could sign up for, and then but the bulk of them were audition only classes. And so the higher level that you placed into, those were we had madrigals, like silver and gold madrigals, and a competitive women's choir, and those were traveling choirs. So I've been a paid performer before because locally the community centers and the community clubs, especially during the holiday time, would pay us, because we had full like madrigal costumes, would pay us to come like carol during the Christmas season. And then that money would go into an account, because every year each choir took a trip somewhere. So my first trip to Disney, my second trip to Disney World was with that choir, and the cost of the trip was offset by money that I earned as a member of the choir. I was also a member of, oh wow, taking it back, Greensboro Youth Council. And so it was a volunteer organization where high school kids throughout the city would come together and put on activities. So there was a Halloween kind of like centralized trick-or-treating type activity for students in the community that was located at one of our large libraries. And Greensboro Youth Council put on that organization. We planned all the events, face painting, tabling, and that kind of stuff. So those were the type of extracurricular activities I did during the school year. During the summer, my mom always kept me in some kind of camp up until high school. And then once I entered into high school, I did research. And so to your point about guidance and resources, my mother was really, really strategic in calling my schools and talking to the guidance counselors to ask about opportunities, because a lot of times guidance counselors got information and they might share it with like select parents, those who were most involved in the PTA, or just people that they knew. I'll be really, really candid, since that's just who I am. Being from the South, there's still a lot of bigotry that informed some of the decisions that some of those guidance counselors made with regards to who they thought would be the most deserving for those opportunities. And my mom has her name's Patricia, and it's a very unassuming name by phone. And so she would very strategically put on her professional voice and call down as Patricia to learn more about the opportunities, and then send me to the guidance counselor to pick up the paper copies of those resources that otherwise I would not have known about because of the prejudice that I referenced earlier. And so I was fortunate to be able to participate in like paid research projects at various institutions, which also exposed me to college and university settings while I was still in high school, which made my comfort level with going away from home to college very high. So when it was time for me to graduate and move on, I had spent so many summers either at camps or doing, independent research projects. I was ready to, conquer a new institution because I was familiar with the environment.
So it sounds like you're ready, you're getting right into deciding what's next. But before we go to what's deciding what's next, you've talked a lot about your mother, Miss Patricia, and how she advocated for you. She code switched when she needed to, she stayed informed, she was very active. How do we, or what would be some things that you think that you personally learned from her modeling, being an advocate for you, but also to how you were able to extract some of those things and then start to advocate for you when she wasn't in those spaces?
Oh, that's a really great question. I don't know that I began to advocate for myself until she wasn't like in proximity and near to do it for me. So as a high school student, like my mother was so involved, I can't think of a time when I had to do something for myself, because she's like that mama bear type person that was on it, and she still is. Now I have to say, like, I got it, mom. Let me try on my own. So I don't know that there was a time during my high school years where I exercised those skills, but they definitely, in hindsight, I can see how they informed the way I chose to navigate my experience as a first generation college student. So where my peers were, thought of me like as a hustler because I had multiple jobs on campus, and I was always finding like pockets of opportunities to get involved and to, be sponsored into activities. In hindsight, I realized that all of my peers in high school, in college, didn't come to college with that level of grit or sense of audacity to advocate for oneself. So it became something that was very natural for me, but something that I absolutely learned from her.
Absolutely. And, to kind of connect with what you said in terms of being a first generation college student. So for myself, my mother did those quiet moments of advocacy, but they were quiet. And I had no idea what she was doing in the background until much later in life. But those quiet moments of advocacy helped propel me to one, I knew how to read. I saw on television, people were going off to college and those experiences. And I realized that I had wanted that for myself. So I took to filling out the form That was the
Mhm.
first step. And so
Mhm.
once I did that, and then being able to rely on other people in my network, so mentors, teachers, favorite teachers, to be honest, people that saw some things in me that I may not have seen in myself to
Mhm.
help me get me to that next step. So
Mhm.
for you, that deciding on what was next and whether or not you were going to go straight into college, which I'm pretty sure Miss Patricia said, yep, that's where you're
Mhm.
going,
Mhm.
or taking some time off. Talk to us about what was that next step, and that would probably lead us into our next slide.
Sure. I remember there kind of being like this understanding in our house. As I mentioned, my brother is 8 years older than me, that there were like two paths that were presented to us after high school. You either went to the military or you went to school. My brother chose the former, and I chose the latter. And she raised us and groomed us to prepare us accordingly. But I think back to the some of the earliest memories that I have, um, of like my preparation to go into like professional spaces began as early as the 8th grade, when she had me volunteer at my local middle school for 2 or 3 weeks in the administrative space, learning how to type, write emails, respond to phone calls. I mentioned that I had the opportunity to do research every summer, but those were programs that I had to apply for and then interview with faculty members to talk about my interests, so that there could be like placement. And so she would sit on the couch next to me and coach me on those interview skills. So when I got ready to go to college, it wasn't really a question of if I was going, it was just a matter of like where I would attend. And I thought, as I mentioned earlier, I was ready to go to college. I only applied to one state school because I was trying to get like away from North Carolina. And then once I got my acceptances, I realized I wasn't really quite ready to leave the state. So I went to UNC Charlotte for undergrad, my undergrad degree. And this conversation is just reminding me of how the way that she groomed me, to navigate like professional spaces helped me long before I became like a full-time professional. But the other thing that my mom gave me to the point of self-advocacy is the beauty of language, and learning how to read somebody without ever saying an expletive. Because I sat next to my mom when I have a very vivid memory of my mom having a conversation with an elementary school assistant principal where he had done something that was prejudicial or discriminatory. And she read that man for filth, and all she used was her expansive vocabulary. And so I have learned how to communicate rather effectively and to be direct, but to use words in a way that will allow me to be understood, but also in a manner that will that expresses my conviction without folks without giving folks the opportunity to dismiss what I'm trying to communicate based on my word choice.
Mhm. Fair enough, man. So that beautiful foundation that was created in you through your mother,
Mhm.
and the experiences that she opened you up to, those opportunities. Talk to us a little bit more about, okay, where did you land in terms of one, a major? You already talked about what school, and what classes did you take?
Oh, so I came into college just knowing that I was going to be a psychiatrist, and I applied to. I said that I was going to double major in psychology and biology with a minor in Spanish. And the UNC Charlotte happily admitted me, but thought this girl don't know what she wanted to study, and so they marked me as undecided, even though I wasn't. I actually studied in all three of those areas. Um, but I'm not a psychiatrist, so clearly I took a different path. But that was a gift that I didn't know that I needed because the university I attended had living learning communities, and so I was placed in a residential community for people who were not yet decided in their major. And I was enrolled in a corresponding freshman seminar course. that really just exposed me to like university. Think of it as like a success 101 course. And so it kind of broke down the, how the university operates, what are academic advisors, what are like intramural sports teams, the importance of being involved as an undergraduate student, but not being overcommitted. It was taught by the Vice Chancellor of Student Affairs, who ultimately became my mentor, and kind of tapped me into my career path. But it was also taught by an undergraduate student who was a woman of color. And so I had representation, in one of my courses by a person who was presented as a teaching assistant, so a leader. And so that, again, that was a gift I didn't know that I needed as an undergraduate student who was, the first in my family to go on this journey of higher education. And so the courses that I took really align with those subject matters. I took some, early entry level biology classes, early psychology classes. I started working on my Spanish minor. And as I mentioned, I ultimately graduated with a bachelor's degree in psychology and minors in biology and Spanish.
So with all of that, very diverse, very deep. I really do want to continue to call out how important representation is, and how it can be a game changer for many young people. And maybe this might also tie into your professional track, in terms of being representation for young people on a campus that is a PWI, it's an Ivy League. What that looked like. And then also in terms of your experiences, how did you go beyond, these are the classes that I took, what other activities and experiences did you have that made you have a well-rounded experience at the undergraduate level?
Sure. I'll start with the last part of your question. I was one of those students that was borderline over involved in student activities. I was in like the hall council within my residence hall. What else did I do? We had a campus activities board, which planned free programming for the entire campus. I volunteered on that. I applied and was accepted into a program called Emerging Leaders. And so one thing to know about UNC Charlotte, or any university, every university kind of has like a culture of student services. UNC Charlotte is a university that supports service leadership, and helping students shape their identity and their lens as a servant leader. That philosophy very much aligned with the way that my mom trained me as a Christian. And so that program as an emerging leader really just resonated with how I wanted to develop my skills as a leader. That was a commitment in the spring semester of my first year. That was every Wednesday from 3 to 5 p.m. And we had to do some like retreats and that kind of stuff. So it was a lot of time commitment that took away from my ability to be successful academically in my freshman year. And so I'm a doctor today, but again, like I'm an intelligent person, but I'm not the type of intellect that can do it without working for it. I have to read, I have to do my homework, I have to put in the work. And I like to emphasize that to let folks know that like it's doable, but sometimes the success comes with, a grind that's unavoidable. And so to circle back to what I was saying, I was just involved in leadership activities, programming. All those programs were free. I was on a work study student, but as a freshman, you were only allowed to work 10 hours per week. And so I had a minimal amount of coin. So my activities needed to be free because I didn't have a whole lot of money to do things that weren't.
Fair enough. Definitely remember those days, and many that are on the call will experience those days, and nobody can tell you about it. You have to experience it for yourself. For me, it was tomato sauce in a can, which was like 99 cents, and 3 boxes of pasta for $1. That's $2, and that allowed me to eat for almost a full week with my little canteen or food allowance that went along with that. So but that definitely adds to grit and transferable skills and all of the others that kind of go along with that. So we know that you settled on UNC Charlotte, but were there a top 3 that you were really angling for?
Yes. I remember I had my heart set on attending Xavier University. My physician was a Black woman, and she went to Xavier University. And so that's how I learned about her alma mater. And she told me all of these stats about how Xavier was really great at preparing Black students to take the MCAT and go to medical school. And if you recall, I said I wanted to be a psychiatrist, so I thought, which would have required me to go to medical school. And so I applied early admission to all of my universities, and I Xavier didn't do like early notification, and so but UNC Charlotte did. So like I recall applying in October to all of my schools, and I knew by December that I'd been accepted to UNC Charlotte. I had to wait until April to learn that I was accepted into Xavier, and by that point, I was already settled because UNCC kind of takes a customer service model approach to incoming students. So I knew my financial aid packet, I knew where I was going to live, I knew all of these things that made it very easy for me to say yes, just a couple months before I was set to graduate. And but I will tell you that Xavier was actually my first choice. Had I attended Xavier, though, I would have been a student there during Hurricane Katrina. And so I say that, like, Jesus knew where I needed to be, because I would have had to leave the university anyway.
Mhm. Awesome. That's a really good backstory, and connection of, like, sometimes we have a vision for where we want to go, but being able to pivot and know that you're going to end up where you're supposed to be is a beautiful lesson to learn, but it takes time to learn it.
Yep.
So as we kind of move out of your college experience, and is there anything else that you want to share about your undergrad and graduate experiences that you want to share?
I will say one thing, and I don't. I often reflect on like what inspired me to do this when I did my freshman year, but I had access to a number of academic advisors through programs that I was a part of, and they just so happened to all be women. And so in my first or second meetings with them, I asked all of them, like, what was the best part about your undergraduate experience, and what was one thing that you regret? And hands down, all of them said that they wish that they had studied abroad before they graduated from undergrad, because traveling as an adult is really challenging. And I knew that I wanted to travel because my mom, again, had always exposed me to the concept of, being a global citizen and learning about other cultures, et cetera. And so I took that to heart. And I'll say that my freshman year was not like my proudest academic performance, and that impacted my ability to be able to study abroad, because I had to work on getting my GPA up so that I could be eligible for the program that I wanted to participate in, which was a program in Spain that allowed me to complete my Spanish minor. So I made a decision to stay a fifth year, partially because I wasn't quite ready. So I know some folks might take a gap year in between high school and college. Think of my fifth year of undergrad as my gap year between college and grad school, and like a next level of adulting. I knew that I wanted to go to graduate school right after undergrad, but I didn't have the capacity to study for the GRE, to prepare for that graduate school process, the applications, interviews, etc., and complete all of my required coursework in my fourth year of undergrad. So I made a decision that I would take the 4 classes. I think at that time you had to take like 5 or 6 classes to earn a Spanish minor. I took 4 of my Spanish classes for that minor in Spain. So my 5th fall semester was the semester that I studied abroad. It was the semester that I used to complete my credits for that minor. And it gave me the spring semester to come back and take classes that I was interested in that weren't required for any of my degrees, but it also let me take easier classes. So I took things like Black images in the media, acting for non-majors, women's studies. I think I had 1 biology class. And so that lighter academic load gave me the capacity to do the extra work of studying for the GRE, applying to grad schools, and making decisions, traveling for interviews. And so it's all about just being really intentional and operating with a strategy on, this is where I want to go in the future. This is what I need to do. And where can I build in the capacity in order to be successful without losing momentum? And so for me, my undergraduate career was a 5-year plan. But living in Spain for a semester like changed my life, because I made a promise to myself when I lived there that I would leave the continental US at least once a year, every year for the rest of my life. And I kept that promise to myself up until COVID-19, where I didn't travel anywhere internationally last year. But I've literally been around the globe with the exception of Antarctica, and that's still like a tentative possibility for me to travel. But I've been lots and lots of places, and it's informed my worldview. Sorry, y'all. It's informed the way I view the world and the way I interact with people. So
That's absolutely amazing. What really struck me was that strategy you talked about in terms of, I knew I had a goal of 5 years, completing my undergraduate degree, having that influence in that conversation with all of these women, and having and them saying like, try, going studying abroad, what that really meant. Were there anyone else that was in your network that really helped you develop this strategy beyond, okay, they say this, I have this, how do I connect the dots to make this a reality? How do you love that journey that you then decide to take?
there were so many people in my undergraduate career that were a part of my community. There was a woman named Mrs. Lucas. She was the director of an office that was called Student Support Services at the time that I joined. And it was a department that was intentionally created to support first generation college students, low income students, students with disabilities. But she wrote grants to make sure that she had money that could expose us to just other aspects of like the world. We would go on trips. She would bring in speakers. The person that I mentioned, my freshman seminar course teacher, his name was Chuck Lynch. He was the vice president of student affairs. He became my mentor and like tapped me into the profession, because I didn't know that working at a university was a job that a person could aspire towards. And so he played an integral role throughout my career, just because he made time for me to just learn more about my experience as an undergrad. I didn't realize at that time that it was a big deal to be able to like get on the calendar of a vice president's, whenever I wanted to have a meeting. But that certainly informed the way I navigated my professional career and the way I interacted with people who have higher titles, because many of my colleagues, and this is a segue into my tenure in grad school as a paraprofessional, but then subsequently my full-time job at Cornell, thought, oh, well, I can't talk to such and such because they're vice president or they're president or they're a chancellor or assistant chancellor. And in my mind, I was just like, well, they're a person and they're human, right? And there are common points of interest. And this person has something that I can learn from. And so I'm going to engage them respectfully, but let them know that, I want to know them. And so having, again, that access to people who are titled, who can serve as sponsors or mentors or coaches in a way that was very casual for me, prepared me for interacting with people with similar titles and influence, that I would come to understand the significance of that once I became a professional and began to navigate like the bureaucratic aspect of being a full-time employee at a university.
I am smiling because I'm thinking about, one, when you mentioned Mrs. Lucas' name, there was a smile on your face.
Yeah.
That you just completely lit up. Then I think about, there's a toolkit that I'm hearing that you have.
Mm-hmm.
What's your favorite color?
I would say like a blue or a turquoise.
okay, there's a blue turquoise, I'm here in Florida, so I'm gonna go with turquoise,
Mhm.
for that tropical vacation that you may be
Yeah.
aspiring for. And in that toolkit, I've heard you pack in there grit, determination, networking. There were some mentors that were involved. There's your village of all these people, all these collective experiences that you've had, courses that you've taken. But I also heard when you talk about Chuck, I can't remember Chuck's last name,
Lynch.
Chuck Lynch, who actually served not as a mentor, but a sponsor, because
Mhm.
he opened up some doors for you.
He
And
did.
to me, those doors opened into where you are in terms of your professional pathway. So
Mhm.
let's get into that.
Yes. I chose to go to graduate school in another state. So I left North Carolina in 2008 and I moved to a very small town in Illinois. One of the things that that experience gave me was perspective and context, because for many of my classmates, Macomb, Illinois was a booming metropolis. It was a big town. And they were happy to be going to school in the big city. I was the only visible minority in my cohort. There were 21 of us. I was the only person of color. I was the only person from the East Coast. There was one other person from the West, but everyone else was from central Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Michigan states. And what that gave me was and a better understanding of how people live in a different part of the country. So, fellow citizens. One of the things that I hopped over was the fact that I had a summer internship at the University of San Diego. So, the summer before I studied abroad in Spain, I spent about 9 to 10 weeks in San Diego. So at this point, I'm a person who's from the southeast of the nation who moved west, then went abroad, and then came back to go live in the middle. And I was not prepared at all for living in the Midwest. And I took with me this expectation of what my experience in grad school would be like. I thought, I'm an adult now. I'm going to be studying with other people who are adults. Um, and what I walked into was an academically rigorous program, but I was still just with a collection of human beings. And when you work with human beings, people bring with them all of their flaws and biases, like myself included, and our, the challenges that are associated with a higher level of learning, but also a program that was designed to teach us how to work with people, and more specifically how to work with students, to foster like the holistic development of a group of people that I just belonged to like 5 months before. So I was an undergraduate student. Then I went to graduate school to learn about how to support undergraduate students. And so it was there that I developed a lens to see how the student affairs professionals at UNC Charlotte really helped move me along my journey in ways that I didn't have the language for. That I didn't see them as a part of my village or my tribe. I didn't have language to call them coaches or mentors or sponsors. Um, so to your point about geographic considerations, I went where the opportunities were. One of the best pieces of advice that a mentor gave me in undergrad was not to pay for grad school, especially since I was going into higher education. She said you can get an assistantship, a graduate assistantship, or a research assistantship, or a fellowship. Just go where you can get money to support this academic pursuit. And I interviewed. I went to like a placement exchange, and I interviewed with lots of colleges and universities. And to the point that I made earlier, I had been I had successfully participated in those types of processes since I was 14. So by the time I was ready to graduate from college, interviewing with a bunch of colleges and universities, I was nothing but like, I interview well, I put on my suit, I'll smile and answer your questions, and then I'm going to ask you some questions to make sure that what you're offering will work for me. And so I already had that lens to know that the interview process was two-way. And I came to choose the program that I selected because of an interview that I had with a faculty member in that program. And to this day, he is a mentor of mine. He's been terribly supportive. He was supportive of me in that in the Midwest, when he could see that my difference as a woman of color um, resulted in some differing treatment by my classmates. And he reached out to me to say, hey, like, I just want to check in with you, see how you're doing. Let me know how these class discussions are impacting you, if at all. He opened the door and gave me opportunities to be a teaching assistant. And so I left with that experience as well, which ultimately served me well when I wanted to teach at the local community college. And he just emailed me last week to ask me to apply for a job. So he is, one of my professional champions, but he helped me cultivate a language of seeking help that I did not have, because I always thought that I have to grind, I have to hustle, and I have to get it done on my own. And it wasn't until I was out there that I realized that there are people who are helping me, and that I can take the initiative before I'm, in the boat without any paddles and trying to figure out how to steer my way back to shore, that I can just be a little more proactive and assertive and ask for help, even from people who don't look like me, because there are allies in unsuspecting spaces. And to the point about company reputation, at the time, the comparable faculty member who taught in that program was a woman who co-authored one of the major texts that most institutions that teach higher education use, in student development theory. And so I knew I was going to an academic program where I would be taught by experts in the field, because they were writing the books that everyone else had to read. So that was really helpful, but that was not a school that was on the top of my list at all. Wasn't even on my radar. But because I went to that that interviewing session out in Wisconsin, I was in a computer lab, and a graduate student that was part of the recruiting team saw me at a computer and said, hey, have you ever considered Western Illinois? You should apply. And so that's how I ended up there, but they were not on my radar at all. And so to the
Wow.
next theme,
before we go to the next thing, can
Sure.
I just, love in the chat. Thank you so much for kind of chiming in. Someone referenced the fact that they love allies in unsuspecting places.
Mhm.
And when you talked about the interview process and being ready to ask your own questions, to me, I heard love in that. So being able to get us to a place to really talk about that self-love aspect and how that
Sure.
shows up.
Yeah.
And then as you answer that and delve into that, that probably will lead us into your passion or job security. Which are you looking for?
Definitely. And I'll say that the answer to that question is both. But when it comes to love, I think back to the people who worked at UNC Charlotte who were glad that I was pursuing a career that was similar to theirs, and they prepped me for that interview process. They were my champions on site, talking to peers in the field, saying, she's a really great candidate, etc. But one of the things that I learned from my internship process, the kind of drop that I referenced about working out at the University of San Diego, was the importance of learning how to assess whether or not an opportunity would be a good fit for me based on what I was hoping to get out of that. And also learning that in the interview process, it was clear they were looking for graduate students who could do something for them. And so I wanted to make sure that the internship that I landed would, and this goes back to my mentor saying don't pay for grad school, would be able to afford me some quality of life where I wouldn't just be out in the middle of nowhere. I'm kind of like destitute without any resources, and working in a way that fulfilled someone else's goal and agenda, without having, excuse me, some intentionality about what it was that I wanted to accomplish. Um, I think when it comes to I'm trying to frame, because I don't know that I thought about that in the context of love. Definitely advocacy. Um, I think it was just really clear for it. I know that I have always made decisions about graduate school and my professional opportunities in through the lens of purposefulness and service, because I know that I, I have to be passionate about and have a love for what I'm doing. Otherwise, I won't show up. And so I absolutely, yes, love and my commitment to serve others informed the career path and choices that I've made. And honestly, like love for my family, because again, I've mentioned being a first generation college student, there are certain um, responsibilities that I've chosen to accept that go along with falling into that category. And so, to the question about passion or job security, it's always both, because I need to find passion in the work that I do, but I also have a sense of responsibility to give back to my family because I love them and because they are like my number one cheerleaders, and
Mhm.
encourage me to like just to not, they don't just want me to survive, they want me to thrive without any limitations. So it's go wherever the opportunities are, we will, sing your praises.
Mhm.
But they always know I always come back home. So
Absolutely. And I know that they have open arms and always give you a soft place to land. And so
definitely.
that's very important, especially when we talk about who our village is.
Mhm,
Sometimes it is our family, and sometimes it's not. It's
mhm,
others that may be surrounding and supporting you and being your biggest cheerleaders when you need them the most.
yeah.
And so, I really I take a step back around the self-love and why
Mhm,
it for me that's the way it resonated and connected. And that's why I
mhm,
wanted to share it. But
mhm,
also too, because I had to get into a place around what were my core values. And for
mhm,
me, which may be a little weird for some people, but for me, maximize my income and job security are actually high up on my core values.
mhm,
Because for me, they do connect back with my family, but knowing that I can't be of service to my family if I'm not in good health. So I got to love myself first so that
mhm,
I can love you
mhm.
fully.
I
Uh,
think I to your point, I I think I came to that understanding um, during my experience working at Cornell, because of the thing that drew me to Cornell was not the reputation of the university. I came there to serve my community. I was a residence hall director in Ujima Residential College, which is a themed community that focused on the experiences of Black people, both domestically and abroad. And I wanted to be in a position where I could connect with students around something that was meaningful to me, to be able to have meaningful dialogue and engage in programming. And it took me a while to realize that the culture of the company was one that will always voice its appreciation for my contributions to the space, and was willing to allow me to self exploit under the pretense of being purposeful and being a servant leader. And so they were always willing to allow me to invest my time, but I was not, like, there was a lack of reciprocity with regards to how I was being compensated. And it took me a while to understand the distinction between appreciation and value. And over the course of the latter half of my tenure at the university, became far more strategic in advocating for myself as a way of demonstrating my love for myself, to in order to further like my career goals during my tenure there, and learned that I could invest my energy and my effort in serving the people that drew me to the university, and in developing professional skills that furthered the goals of the institution. But I also was really strategic in figuring out a way to repackage all of those experiences. So always focusing on my career advancement. And so I came into Cornell knowing that I was going to get my terminal degree. I always wanted to leave I thought that I would need to leave the institution and go to school full time in order to become a doctor. Turns out that was not the case. But all of my actions after, I would say, my first 3 years there were in some way or another tied to my path towards becoming Dr. Cason, which began in 2016 and subsequently ended in 2019. And I knew very definitively that after I finished that degree, I would also be looking to leave the university. I just didn't realize that I would be leaving the field of higher education.
Well, drop the mic and let's just open up and tell us about your new opportunity, because believe it or not, we only have 5 minutes left.
Wow, sure. So my position is a brand new position at Gulfstream Aerospace. As I mentioned, I was recruited for this role. The woman that found me, she found me on LinkedIn to make me aware of the opportunity. And I would say, around about June or so, with most of the individuals in the rest of the world who were grieving the loss, in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery, I was just really reflecting on the numerous ways that institutional racism was a part of my experience in higher education, and also reflecting on the fact that, I have a particular set of skills that can affect change in this area. I am a trained educator at heart. I am Dr. Theoria Cason, but I have the same degree as Dr. Biden in the White House. So I'm a doctor of education. And I also have this global lens that I've referenced through my experiences traveling the world and working with people who are similar and different, to help facilitate like knowledge and understanding of difference. And so my responsibilities at Gulfstream will be to do that, right? So to work on implementing educational initiatives within the company related to unconscious bias and cultural awareness, and helping them develop additional curriculum, but also helping them to figure out how to create spaces to employ, to support the various categories of employees that work at the organization. And so in some companies, they have something called ERGs, or employee resource groups. Other companies might use different acronyms, but essentially it's a way to create a space for people who have a shared common identity to come together based on that identity. So it could be women or women of color or men of color or veterans or people with disabilities who want to talk about how that identity shows up for them in the workplace, or they just want to find their village of folks who can understand how they navigate life. Gulfstream currently does not have ERGs. It is on the list of things that they want to accomplish in the D&I, or diversity and equity and inclusion space. But part of my responsibilities are also to help them figure out how to launch and successfully implement that initiative, given that Gulfstream is a global company that has multiple locations in America and also abroad. So those are just a couple of the things that I know are part of my responsibility, but I also am expecting that I'll have to pioneer some new initiatives, given that it's a brand new role.
Awesome, an amazing journey. So I turn to your slide, and that is around how you are authentically you. Share your final thoughts with us as we close out today's session.
Yeah. So this is one of my favorite quotes. I know you'll learn it, folks, but I'll read it to you. Caring for myself is not self-indulgence. It is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare. And one of the things that has shaped my experience as a student and an employee in higher education is the fact that I'm often the only one. I'll even go back as far as my time in high school, because I was academically gifted. I always placed into those more difficult or academically rigorous classes, but many times I was the only one, or one of a few people of color, or girls or women of color. And it took me a while to realize that sometimes just my regular Black excellence is, it triggers other folks' insecurities in ways that create a political bureaucratic culture, not politics in the sense of like Democratic or Republican, but folks vying for power and agency or influence. And I have come to a place where I'm really comfortable just being my Black girl magical self, unapologetically. And it's really, really important. And this is a message that I like to share to anyone, that it's essential that you do that, because representation matters, but it also gives other people permission to be their unapologetically magical selves as well. And in a space where all of the isms, racism, sexism, xenophobia, homophobia, are just kind of woven into the fabric of our American society. It requires a lot of intentionality to challenge those things that have been accepted as normal. And so that's why I think Audre Lorde referred to it as an act of political warfare. And that's the lens and the authority with which I choose to walk into spaces to say, like, this is me, take it or leave it. I don't know how to be anyone other than myself. And what I commit to offering is my excellence. And if that works for you, great. But if not, I've also, and this to the point of self-love, am learning to be unafraid of walking away from opportunities and people that no longer serve me.
Ooh, Dr. Theoria Cason. Got it?
Yep.
I said it right?
You did.
Thank you so very much. We appreciate all the nuggets that you've shared with us today. A reminder, this is being recorded and it will be on our YouTube channel and on our social media platforms. I will also share that if you would like a gift for attending today's session, just please email myself, Marsha Iverson, my co-founder, or Imani Robinson, the director of Today's Girl, Tomorrow's Woman, and we would happily send over to you by physical mail, your physical mailing address, a little token of our appreciation for your attendance. Reminder to join us for our next speaker. Information makes the modern world go round, the field of IT, on February 24th from 4:30 to 5:30 p.m. And a plug for, and mark your calendars for, March 20th, 2021 will be our 8th annual Today's Girl, Tomorrow's Woman virtual conference from 10 a.m. to 12 noon Eastern Standard Time.
Can you please go back to the slide with the emails?
Surely.
And I saw a question about whether or not you can look me up on LinkedIn. Absolutely, please connect. I don't have any limitations on how you can contact me, so you should be able to just send me a request or a message, and I'll happily connect with you. If you want to chat offline, I'm happy to do that as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for making yourself available and sharing your story with us today. Thank you so much to everyone for joining. We appreciate your comments. We're getting lots of rave reviews in the chat, and we'll follow up with an evaluation form for all those that attended today. Once again, thank you so much for your time, and we'll see you for our next session on February 24th. Thank you again. Have a good afternoon, everyone.